what we're going to do today. Today is all about really getting rolling on paper 3. Hopefully you had a chance to watch the video I made on Monday in my basement with my children probably screaming in the background at certain points. I know I could hear them. I assume you could hear them. Anyway, what I want to do, this first part won't be the most fun you've ever had in a class, but I do think it's useful. It's almost always useful. For a solid 5 minutes, I will time you. Do not worry about timing yourselves. For a solid 5 minutes, here's what I want you to do. You need something to write with and write on. It can be electronic if you want, but in my experience, it's weirdly better if you do the old school, like with your hands. But if you don't have that, I know it's 2021. Some people don't. Some people come to this class with no pen and paper, which blows my mind. But if that's you, you can do it electronically. I allow it, but I'm recommending the old school, the thing your parents did way back when. Okay. Here's what we're gonna do. When I say go, okay, I want you, to the best of your ability, to not stop writing for 5 minutes. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. If you got to do one of these occasionally to like stretch it out, I get it. What I'm trying to tell you right now is pace yourselves, because your hand will cramp up, all right? Pace yourselves. Don't hurt yourself. Just keep writing though. Even if it's shit, as you're doing it, like this is shit, keep writing. Just keep doing it, all right? Now here's our topic. Ideally, by this point, you don't have to have chosen what you're going to write about for paper 3, but I would like you to maybe be leaning towards something, okay? Maybe you got 2, or God help you, at the most 3 that you're kind of like, I don't know, one of these. Pick one of those. One of those you feel pretty good about. Or best case scenario, you have chosen one, then write about that. For these 5 minutes, I want you, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't screw it up. I try to keep it simple. What do you want to write about? So like the first 2 sentences, as always, could be summary. Just help yourself out, okay? This is for you. I'm not going to take it from you. But then after that, cut yourself off, because the real question is, why? Why do you want to write about it for this paper? How do you feel like it might participate in the conversations we've had in this class? Does it expand upon anything? Does it remind you of anything? Can you think about it in terms of like one of the poems we read or one of the characters we talked about? Anything at all. And I mean this, you have to keep writing. That's the whole point of this exercise. All right. And go. I do apologize for any hand cramping. I do understand. It probably happens to all of you. Now, next part of the exercise. I first want to tell you, in case you don't know this already, a lot of what you wrote just now, it's stream of consciousness, right? It's not going to be super useful. It's not going to be super constructive, because it's just your brain going blah for 5 minutes. You actually kind of do that a lot of the time when you write anyway. It's not quite so insane, possibly, as whatever you ended up with, okay? But when you guys are drafting, a lot of the mistakes you make, whether it's like an awkward construction, like when you go back and read your work, you're like, I would never talk like that. No, you wouldn't, because you take a moment when you speak, right? But all the weird stuff in your drafts usually come about in a similar kind of fashion, where your brain is trying to say something and you don't quite know what it is yet, so you write through it and then you get to it, but then it's that middle part that's goofy. So that's the first thing you can take away from this exercise. Any weirdnesses you see in here are most likely already reflected in your work, just in a watered down way. The reason I had you do it though, other than that little bit of, you should edit your stuff, hopefully, probably, there are at the very least, sorry, some things in this exercise we just did that are useful. They will be specific in some shape or fashion, okay? It'll be either a scene or a character or even just a theme, you know, that you see reflected in a work, whatever that might be. And then usually in the neighborhood of that specific detail will be some kind of thoughts from you as to why that detail is significant. And again, this is all probably a little bit of a shallow dive right now, but this is the start to your analysis, whatever that's going to be. And normally for this next part, I would ask for volunteers, but attendance is light today. So the good news, you probably all get to go. Hooray! So who wants to start?
What are we doing exactly?
All I want to know What text did you write about? And then, well, I'll give you guys a minute to sort through it, actually. We'll do that first. That's a good call. Go back and pick over this. And again, this is for you, so whatever works for you. But either underline or star or find some way to denote anything you feel like might be useful for a paper. Even if you're not sure, even if you're like, well, this isn't complete, ass. All right, then put a thing next to it. Take a minute and do that, because I want to talk about it. All right, as you guys are wrapping that up, now, I always skip a step. Who would like to go first? Sweet. What'd you pick?
Just saying a sentence or?
Well, what text did you pick first of all? Like what movie or book or?
Oh, Deadpool.
Deadpool. Okay. Have not seen it still. It's children and whatnot. I'm familiar with it. And you're thinking about doing the first one?
Yes.
Okay. In brief, why'd you pick? First of all, is everybody else familiar with the movie? I assume you guys are the target demographic. So okay. Why'd you pick it? What struck you?
It's a great movie. It's awesome. It's got
Sure.
a million one-liners in it that they're just great.
That's kind of interesting, and we never talked about this in class, but movies like Die Hard, for instance, it's got some pretty great one-liners in it too.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not as many, but that's interesting. We'll come back to that. Okay. Any other reasons that it struck you as like?
The acting is good. It's
Yeah.
a love story. It's action movie. It's a comedy. It's a mixture of just about everything you want.
Well, and it's also a hero movie, right? Like
It's a hero movie.
it's an action movie, but it's a modern action movie, which is to say it's Marvel and like one of those like Avenger-y type.
Yeah.
But of course, it's different, right? Like that's what's key about this movie. Is it's also satire. Like it takes advantage of your knowledge of how those movies are supposed to be and like twists it in different places, right? Like takes your expectations and either subverts them or surprises you in some way or does something to what you think how you think things are supposed to be. And when they do that, that's the part where you go, ah, ha, 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 right? Like that's the, yeah. When you're satirizing something, I'm trying to think of an example you guys might know, and I have no idea what you know. The easiest place I know to go think about satire is something like The Daily Show on Comedy Central. I don't know if you're at least familiar with this. It's not news. It's not. They cover news topics, but they satirize the news, right? So they cover similar material, just like Deadpool covers similar material to like the Avengers, but it satirizes that material, that approach. It makes fun of it, right? Usually, when you're making fun of a thing, why do we do that? Other than just to be mean, because kids will do that. Why do you guys think?
Try to broaden your idea, your scope.
What do you mean by that?
to see where you're not thinking just so focused, that you can expand out. It makes you rethink the situation in its entirety.
So applying that to Deadpool specifically, you're saying somehow in satirizing our expectations, what we think is acceptable even in a movie like that, in that genre. A movie like this says, that's ridiculous, right? Like in satirizing those expectations, it's seeking to like broaden our horizons in some respects. For sure. That is the beginning of analysis, right there. Again, I can't help terribly much because I've not seen the movie at all. But any moment you see it satirizing action movies for one, hero movies for two, perhaps elements of masculinity like we've talked about in class for three, any or all of those, right, are probably rife with sort of that beginning thesis in mind. You see what I'm saying? And Double Trouble, if it's ever satirizing one or all three of those, you might also consider, are they interconnected in any sort of a way, right? Because we talked about masculinity generally in this class. We didn't talk about action movies much, unfortunately. We just didn't have the time, right? But it's interesting when thinking of action movies like Die Hard, but any of the other ones that we kind of name dropped along the way, how much of the action genre specifically gets wrapped up in masculine stereotypes. And I know there's kind of obvious reasons for that, but it's still interesting like how they're paired in a way. Like action heroes are always this way. Well, how much of that is just reflective of like hyper masculinity, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's almost like they're inseparable. And now if you're satirizing action, then you're also probably often satirizing some of the masculine stuff we think about. And then again, the question is like, well, why are they doing that? What are they trying to get us to think about? But absolutely, that's kind of where you're headed with that, I think. Are there any other like little details you picked up on in your write-up there?
Oh, my writing?
Yeah. Or anything that strikes you now? I mean,
I went a completely different way of my thoughts.
sure.
Because I've been trying to brainstorm on what my argument wants to be.
Sure.
And I'm still unsure.
It's all good.
However, I think it would be a little easier to write about. Are action movies of this kind good for society?
You gotta be careful with moralizing. Why do you say that? We'll start there. Why do you have that question in mind?
A lot of violence.
Yeah.
It's fake. Nothing, and it usually comes from, they usually come from pretty bad backgrounds, and then all of a sudden they get great power and they're supposedly good people.
Okay.
They don't allow their bad guys to trial by jury. They just do.
To be fair, a lot of the bad guys in those movies are pretty like Hitler-esque almost. You know what I'm saying? Like in terms of, I'm gonna kill everyone. It's like, well, do we want that motherfucker to have a jury trial? Or just want to?
I agree.
But yeah, I feel you. I feel you. Okay. Well, there's a lot there. What I would say is, number one, and this goes for anyone, you want to avoid at all times any kind of a should statement. We should or should not do X. The reason for that is, immediately when you do that, you're imposing a hypothetical upon your text, okay? Which means you're ignoring the reality of the text. So you gotta avoid that the best you can. However, my kind of counter to that concern, or addendum to that concern, would be these movies are super violent. Number one, though, again, it's important to remember Deadpool is a satire, so like my understanding is it's hyper violent in some places, but I think that's part of the satire. Like it maybe ups the ante in certain spots as opposed to some of the other movies it's making fun of. Mm-hmm. But there should be probably a sort of connection between the violence in Deadpool and violence you'll see in other films or violence you'll see in other places. And again, it's asking us to think about like, why are we so okay with this? Or are we okay with it in certain places and maybe Deadpool takes it too far? And then the question is, well, why is this too far versus some other, like it's trying to get you, I think, to think about that stuff. Mm-hmm. So one question is, does the film maybe feel like it has to take it as far as it does before it upsets you, right? Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then what argument are we making about the viewing public and our bar when it comes to violence? Like, it's kind of high, right? I had something else I was gonna say. You made a couple good points. Oh shit. But it's all of our texts too. It's important to remember they're not created in a vacuum, right? Like, they're reflective of our society. So rather than is it good for society, what I would want you thinking about is how does this movie reflect our society? Okay. Because yes, movies inform people, and people say absolutely, but again, that movie was made by people just like us, like people from our country, from our perspective, whatever. So something in our social, I'm trying to think of something better than zeitgeist, but something in our social background noise comes through in movies like that. And our investigation seeks to try to figure out, try to argue where any of that is coming from. Why do we have a movie in, when did Deadpool come out?
2016, I think.
Okay.
Second one, 18.
Okay. That would have been the year Jack was born, so that would explain why I haven't seen it. Anyway, yeah. But like, how does a movie like that come out in 2016? There's got to be something in us, something we're either thinking about or worried about, or some of our values are somehow reflected in that. And absolutely, man, like violence. I hate to say like an old person, but like I remember movies in the 90s, which was like my formative years, for the most part, not even close to some of the shit we do in movies now, like not even close. So again, it's like, well then why is it just the spectacle of it? And that's weird to think about, that we think violence is just a like something to be seen, you know? There's some questions there though, I think. And yeah, the violence in Deadpool would be hard to ignore. In terms of the one-liners, and then we'll move on, because I want to save time for everyone. One-liners are always interesting to me. On the one hand, they're kind of the same in every movie, which is to say, like you think about when John McClane is in the air vent, and he says two of them. One of them is my favorite. He's like, "Come out to the coast, we'll have a few laughs." You know, he's getting shot at and shit. But then another one, he says, "This must be what a TV dinner feels like." He says those, you know, and it's like, why have those in a movie? But they all have them. In Predator, I don't know if you've seen that. In Predator, when Arnold Schwarzenegger is facing down the Predator, like his mask is off, and they're fighting, and you're like, I'm terrified every time I see it, like even now, because he's this huge alien guy, like with claws and stuff. And Schwarzenegger just looks at him and goes, "You are one ugly son of a bitch." It's weird, but it's funny.
It is.
Right? Why, like...
Deadpool, at one point he's fighting a girl, and he's like, "Is it sexist to hit you? Is it more sexist not to hit you? I'm confused."
That's funny. That's funny. And again, it makes no sense in the moment.
Right.
But so there's two questions immediately. One, why are we injecting humor in spots like this? Spots of tension, I guess, usually, right? Schwarzenegger facing down the alien, Die Hard, the guy is in the vent, like sneaking around. This guy's fighting somebody. So we break the tension somehow with a one-liner. That's an interesting decision to make. Number two, sometimes with certain one-liners, there's a bigger point, which is, yeah, he's in 2016 touching upon this very prevalent question of feminist representation and egalitarianism, which is to say equality. Like, if you're going to be truly equal in an action movie, well, then everyone should get punched, right? Like, isn't that weirdly more equal? But then it's like, but you're not supposed to hit a woman, right? Well, so then how? It's a weird question, but it's a fair one. That the movie is trying to, what you're beginning to say, in like a body paragraph, right? It's trying to engage in this conversation around women's rights. And is it, the question the movie raises, is it a feminist act to uppercut this lady? You know, like, is that like, you're punching this lady for all women, so they have the right to get punched in a movie? That's kind of weird. It raises other questions too, but that would be the start. Yeah, for sure, for sure. You got to think about who that character, whoever it is he's talking to, who that character is, and kind of the rest of the scene. But yeah, that'd be a body paragraph, absolutely.
Yeah, that movie starts, even the opening credits, and it says, rather than the names, it says a hot chick, a British villain, a moody teen.
Oh, they're all types. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, but rather than having the person's name,
Yeah.
right from the beginning, this is how their names come up.
Yeah.
It's making fun of them, satire from the opening.
Well, it's saying something about the genre there, right? Like, it doesn't matter who these people are, they're all playing types, there's types of characters.
Yeah.
That's interesting too. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, I would love to see the movie at some point, perhaps teach it, but how often I'm able to watch a movie, man. We tried to watch something over the weekend, and my youngest, we got through the first 7 minutes in about 45 minutes. So, yeah, but yeah, it sounds right. Really, one thing you might struggle with in a movie like that is paring down evidence and focus, right? Like, it sounds like there might be too much, so you really got to be careful.
There's a lot.
Yeah, but as long as you're really focused, I think, yeah, you could do some good work, for sure. Who'd like to go next? What are you looking at?
For mine, I did Black Panther.
Black Panther. Another movie I haven't seen because it came out somewhat recently, and as I've said already, I have no life. So. Okay. I know a little bit about it. Had students write about it in the past. What drew you to it, first of all?
I mean, I just really like Marvel.
Sure, sure.
So I kind of wanted to go on that because I've seen like Amazon.
There's a lot of them.
More than Python.
Okay.
So I know a bunch of them.
Okay. Yeah.
But I feel like I wanted to go with this one because it kind of shatters the whole toxic masculinity thing.
Well,
And I just
we'll talk about that, but okay.
wants that.
How, I guess from the jump, how is this, I'm asking, I haven't seen it. How does this come up in the film?
Like, how does it like shatter?
We'll start with how it comes up, and then we'll get to shatter.
Okay, well, in a bunch of Marvel movies, it's all just like, man, they're not a bunch. The same with Black Widow, she's always like, even when she's with the Avengers, she's not always like on top. It's always this Thor, Captain America, whatever.
Well, to be fair, Thor's a god.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
But,
No, go ahead.
But like, with him being like the king now that his
Yeah.
dad is dead,
Yeah.
there's always guys get this, that, and a bunch of other tribes in Wakanda and stuff, they're all guys, like it's all warriors that are men
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot, and then the men fight to see who's gonna become king, the next king, whatever. And then with them, all the warriors are women, and then his little sister basically created the whole Wakanda. She made all the technology, all like all the ships they fly, all the power that they have. It's all from the vibranium. And
Yeah.
She creates that because she's like super smart.
All right. What? There's an offshoot here. That I want to come back to. In this question, I mean, I would be careful here just because it is a buzz term these days. But at the very least, what it sounds like the film does is it does have more. It's more representative in this particular case of women. They're in positions of power. Interestingly, not in the ultimate position of power. That's the dude, right? So, but still, they're not servants. They're not maybe lesser is what you're kind of getting at, right? As they might be in other films. One thing I would caution you against: you don't want to be comparing this to other movies, and this goes for everybody. You want to take it. I mean, because that could easily come up in yours as well, right? You can talk about the genre, and I guess you could do that too in a way, but stick to your text. You got plenty to talk about in your text. If you start bringing in other movies, even tangentially, you're going to get yourself into trouble. But okay, that's interesting. I mean, so we often, especially these days, equate representation to power. In this movie, female and also just minority figures. I forgot how to spell. Minority figures in general, right? I mean, the main character is Black Panther. He's a black man, right? Okay. Before we, because I have a question that you raised, but anything else that either from what you wrote or anything coming to you now about the film? Because I've not seen it, so it's okay if not. You can just tell me. Okay. You brought up the vibranium, which is interesting. There's like a natural resource in the region, and correct me if I'm wrong about anything, but like it's only available in that region, right? And it's somewhere in Africa, right? It's like a mythical or fictional place in Africa, right? I'm not sure how in the weeds to get with this. There's a history, a colonial history in Africa for like stuff like diamonds, even now, but of people coming in and trying to take that stuff, subjugating the people. That's how like slavery in a lot of ways started, you know. And I wonder, because again, I've not seen the movie, but I wonder if that gets touched on at all.
Yeah, the villain of the movie.
Yeah, what's his name? People told me.
Killmonger.
It's just stupid. Okay.
But he in the beginning he's in America. He's not in Africa at all. But his dad was killed by Black Panther's dad.
Okay.
And so he's kind of like angry about that, and he wants to get into Wakanda, you know, and take over.
Yeah.
And whatnot, and he wants to because they have everything, and then like he's saying that the people in America, like the Black people, they don't have everything, that they're struggling, they don't get the opportunities that everybody else gets.
Yeah.
And so he.
But what's that got to do with Wakanda, right?
Well, he wants to go there because he wants to get their weapons and stuff and provide for the Black people in America.
So he wants to be like a safe. He wants to use Wakanda's resources and become some kind of a savior figure for. Okay. Okay.
And so he kind of just like, well, the way they get there is they go into a museum and they steal something, like some kind of axe.
It never matters. It doesn't. I mean, please tell. But I'm telling you, like all these movies, it never matters.
And he kind of just says things like they stole from his people and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then he steals the axe. He goes, and then he.
Wait, is it like Paul Bunyan's axe or something goofy like that?
It's almost kind of. It's a little axe. It's very vibrating.
It's like a hatchet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like.
And he's gonna take over the world with this hatchet?
No.
Okay.
But he meets up with this guy that's been taking vibranium from Wakanda and stuff, and that's how he makes all his weapons.
Okay, and this is an American guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And they both like, kind of team up and then find a way to get him into Wakanda so he can take over and whatnot.
And is part of the reason he wants to take over, like, does he, I'm asking, does he at all feel like maybe Black Panther isn't protecting Wakanda and its resources, or isn't, like, militant enough, or something like that? Is it?
Well, it's hidden with the force codes, but I don't think nobody can find
That feels like pretty good defense.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's like always on lockdown.
But he wants it to go on the offense.
Yeah.
And that's maybe his big beef with. Okay. A couple things. And you started here, and some of that can come into play, but especially, I wrote Kill Fate, that's another stupid villain. Killmonger. Students have written about this in the past, I'm using my memory. There's something weird with his skin, right? Killmonger.
Yeah, he like cuts himself and everything comes in there, so it's just a bunch of scars.
He's marked by his violence, by his past, literally on his skin. That might matter in a movie full of black folks in power who are thinking about how that works in places like America and Africa. You know what I mean? If you're marking your skin. But it also might suggest how he carries his violent acts with him, whereas somebody like Black Panther doesn't. You know what I mean? Like, because he doesn't do that. So it might all. I feel like the movie is doing a lot, and I'm trying very, very hard to make this make sense. On the one hand, we're commenting upon black masculinity, most especially, because the two main characters, the protagonist and the antagonist, are two black men, right? And maybe how that works or how we view it. Do you know what I mean? Killmonger is at least a little bit, not entirely, but at least a little bit recalls figures like almost like a Malcolm X, like a civil rights leader, but more tending toward violence as opposed to someone like Martin Luther King, who's obviously more peaceful. They both got assassinated. But I bring all that up to say it's interesting how one guy is the villain and one guy is the hero, and what marks that difference. Do you know what I'm saying? If you can really pinpoint what's different about these guys and their worldviews, I think that'll tell you a whole lot about, you could argue, about what we find acceptable in black main characters. If you're thinking about representation. Does that make any sense? Okay. The other idea that I kind of wrote about as you were writing, anytime we're talking about resources, especially if they're scarce and useful, we're thinking about capitalism, at least we are in America, because that's what we run on. But everybody wants it, right? Not just like everybody wants it, because it's like super good somehow. Do they ever cover that in the movie? Why it's so great? Or they just say it's great?
It's just, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like the strongest metal on earth, so people
Okay. 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 But anyway, it's awesome for some reason. Everybody wants it. That drives up demand, right? Which again brings me to capitalism.
It's indestructible. That's what Captain America's shield is made of, right? That's why it's so potent
Oh, okay. Okay.
and it's limited.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, is it better than adamantium? Anyway,
Yeah.
weird. So Killmonger, importantly, you said, is educated in America. He brings with him clearly American ideals related to this notion of capitalism. You could argue related to this notion of offense. Like, at its root, capitalism is about capitalizing upon weaknesses, whether you're a business or whatever, right? Like, that's how you grow. And so for a guy like Killmonger, stupidly named though he is, it's telling us something about our system and how we work, if it's aligning our education system with that guy, right? Whereas it's portraying Wakanda and Black Panther and all that as like somehow more pure. Do you know what I'm saying? Like somehow not sullied by that in some kind of a way. Now there's way more to say about that, and you can actually take it in a very different direction, but I don't want to throw too much on you, okay? But just, I think that's really important, the fact that he comes here to learn, and then the question is, well, what does he take back with him as a result of that education? What does that say about, again, us as a people, a society, a culture? Does that make any kind of sense? Last but not least, sir, if you would, what are you trying to write about?
I'm still not sure about what I'm going to.
Okay. What'd you write about on your paper?
I read about Parks and Rec because I'm also a fan of the show.
Sweet. It's been a minute. It has been a minute, but I used to know the show quite well. Okay. If you end up writing about it, and of course you have for today, what are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about Tom Haverford.
Aziz Ansari's character. Okay. Cool.
The scrawny Indian man that you described himself as.
He would. Awesome. Okay.
But he gives off a massive bravado, macho feel, even though he has.
Well, in a very particular, like, it's interesting. It's, and I'm sorry I cut you off, but it's always interesting in that show. And I said this in the video from Monday, but the guy on our CourseDen page, bring it up. Thing up. Nope. Damn it. This one? Yeah. This guy. Nick Offerman, but he plays a character in Parks and Rec, who's basically encapsulated in this picture, right? You look at that picture, and that's why I chose it, and you're like, man, right? Covered in sawdust, not smiling, arms like a little bit like, the hell do you want? Type of, you walked into my wood shop type of feel. He's that character in the show. And I think the show purposefully, at least at times, kind of pairs, yeah. And Tom is very much a figure of masculinity, but it's more maybe modern.
I looked it up in time, but word I forgot it already.
Okay.
Metrosexual.
A little bit. Well, and again, it's because he's well dressed, mainly. He's worried about his appearance in a way that a character like this would frown upon, at the very least. Would say, why are you so worried about how you look? That's not quote unquote masculine according to like traditional values, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say all that to say, first, you want to be very careful if you end up writing about the show, if you end up writing about the character, that you don't simply compare and contrast. Like, I'm trying to highlight a little bit of a potential trap for you. I think you could write a paper about this guy, or you could write a paper about Tom. I don't think you could do both. Okay? Do what?
I didn't plan to.
Okay, just making sure. But I also want to say, this guy could come in a little bit, potentially, especially if there's any scenes, because there's a bunch of good ones with them together. Often in those scenes, especially, he'll say something to Tom that like he'll like cut him down somehow, which tells you about him, but also tells you a lot about Tom and what he represents, right? But okay, that's cool. I wonder, this is an honest question. I guess it's not. I think it once might have been a little bit offensive. People might take offense to that term.
I'm not sure what that is.
Metrosexual, it's basically what he's describing. I can find a picture of. Do you remember his last name in the show?
Halford.
Oh, I don't know how to spell that.
Haverford.
Haverford, that's what. Yeah. He's just. That's an even better picture. Yeah. He kind of looks like that. Like he's always, even when he's just kind of hanging out, like he's always very well dressed. Always actually very worried about his appearance. And more than that, like very worried with like maybe what we would describe as creature comforts almost. But again, in a modern way. So very wrapped up, first of all, maybe an offshoot of this again, and this is partially to do with maybe I'm just thinking about it. But one argument the show could have you thinking about is how Tom's metrosexuality, if you like, I mean, you could investigate that in a paper, is like a weird offshoot, like it's only made possible by a capitalist society. Like in communist Russia, there's probably not a lot of metrosexuals running around in the 90s, right? Like it's not possible. But like the excesses that are offered by our system allow for a guy like Tom, who's always not, again, the way he dresses is reflected in everything he does. Like he's always worried about acquiring things, you know? Or like, hey, I just got this new, I think it's been years since I've seen the show, but like, in that one picture I showed you guys where he's like a DJ at a party or something, like I'm pretty sure all that's his. He just has stuff. He always has things. Yeah? Actually, there's another good term I could give you. I want to say I have this right. It's a Victorian idea, but we have it still today. I forgot how to spell again. The idea of conspicuous consumption, the notion that people know how well off you are based upon the things you have, you know? And we do this. You go to somebody's house, you're like, look at Mark's fucking TV. Doing okay, you know? Or, you know, the inverse is true as well. But Tom, that's very much a concern. I think he wants people, it's not just he lives this way, he wants people to know, you know? And again, if that's an important element of his character, again, what might it suggest about the kind of metrosexuality he exudes, if that makes sense? Another question I would add to that for you is, I think the show wants you thinking about this. Is Tom's quote-unquote metrosexuality in some ways an updated form or a contemporary form of masculinity? Like, is it a modern form of it? Whereas a guy like Ron Swanson, who's Nick Offerman's character, is that just the old school that's kind of like dying out?
Yes.
And this is what men are now?
Yeah.
I think so.
He serves as more of a compromise to the to masculinity gain some femininity.
No, I was gonna say too. It's marked a little bit more feminine, especially when you compare it to Ron Swanson. But again, it's interesting. So like, I always love a good although statement for a thesis. I don't know if you guys were taught this in school. I've mentioned it in this class, but a good although statement might be something like, although on the one hand, Tom Haverford is as you say, kind of marks a compromise between traditional masculinity and femininity. You know, he's much more sensitive than Ron Swanson, much more in touch with his emotions and all these things. And we think that's a good thing, right? For sure. Although that, he's also, he can also be characterized by sort of a, what's the word I want? He's preoccupied with the accrual of things and just like, there's another word I want, I can't come up. But like, what the question the show wants you to answer for Tom is like, what really matters to him? I think there's a surface and then there's something under it. But on the surface, at least, what really seems to matter to him is stuff, right? Nice suits, nice other things. There's an episode I'm thinking of in particular where they all go and camp. Yeah. Do what? Okay. There's one like they go to like I want to say a log cabin or something, and Tom is deeply unhappy with having to be in the woods for like a night or two. And obviously Ron Swanson is like, this is awesome. This is exactly what we should be doing all the time. But some of the stuff he says in that episode is just like he's just upset he doesn't have stuff, you know? And so again, it's interesting that we have this character who on the one hand is like an absolute, you know, we could argue step forward in terms of men can be how they want, women should be able to be how they want, like it doesn't really matter. He's that. But at the same time, he's also kind of maybe too tied up in the other opportunities our system provides. Like it allows for men to be that way, but it also allows for men to get too hard into do what?
Like too dependent?
Maybe. I mean, I can't know without, I mean, you can't know without, you know, investigating like an episode or two. But yeah, it's basically, I think with Tom, it's good and bad, probably. There's some really cool things that it does, but at the same time, there's drawbacks to his approach to life. And why is that? Or again, what is it about our system somehow? I have an economic system, but capitalism is wrapped up in our social fabric too, right? Like it's how we think of ourselves as a country. Does that make any sense? A little bit? We can talk more about it if you like. And by the way, I gave you this term. Like that's not my term. Conspicuous consumption is like a scholarly thing. You could absolutely look up and find stuff. But. Okay. What time is it? Woo! All right. Very quickly, I want to try. That goes away when I move around. Oh, it doesn't. Okay, hang on. Dumb hand. Not as smart as you think you are. Bored? All right. Very quickly before we take a break. Annotated bibs. You love them. They're back. This is the sequel. As with many sequels, this one is not terribly different from the first one. And as such, I have not planned to spend a lot of time on it in class. But of course, if you have questions, by all means. To give you the rundown, this is just about the same prompt as for the last paper. It is the same assignment with a few small changes. So all this is the same. The dates are different. I would hope that's obvious. These are listed on the syllabus as well. You're going to have 2 entries due, and then the next time you're going to have 2 more entries due. I do have an important note here. Your primary text will not be the subject of a bib entry this time. Okay? So with paper 2, because that was more of, I keep saying, like a conversation between texts, Die Hard was one of your bibs. Not so this time. So if you're doing Deadpool, you're going to write about that in your proposal. this is what my movie's about, this is some cool stuff I'm thinking about in the movie, this is what I think I want to say about that cool stuff. That's your proposal, that is you talking about your source text. In this case, you're gonna go find sources, just like you did for paper 2. But that's all I want you doing with the bibs. 4 sources I want you to go find. Either about your movie specifically, or in some cases, about like an idea or a theme that you see reflected in your movie, and you just look that up. You can sometimes find really good sources there. That's what I want you doing here. In terms of what the bibs call for, again, is exactly the same as we do with paper 2. So the steps are the same. The example I give you is the same. If you feel like, worst case scenario, you had a pretty good handle on that assignment by the end, well then you should be great. I mean, you still have to go find stuff, but other than that, writing the thing up, basically the same. The other point I would make to you, bear this in mind, and this is, I think, reflected in the paper prompt. This paper is not exactly the same as paper 2, right? Paper 3 is you're making an argument about your text, whatever it might be. The sources you go and find should somehow help you make that argument. They could support some of your claims. You could occasionally find something you straight up disagree with. By the way, I have never known more how I felt about a given argument until I found something I disagreed with. You find something about your movie or show or whatever, and then you read a little, you're like, oh, this guy's a fucking idiot. You could probably pull something from there and then explain to me, not in those terms, how this person is an idiot. That works too. But that's what we're doing in the bibs this time. Are there any questions about that? Okay. I wanted to, very, very briefly, give you an example of the kind of thing we can do. And then we'll go on further. I would recommend scholarly sources. I do allow for popular sources. I absolutely allow for popular sources on paper 2. Okay, and you can do that this time, not least of which because most of what you're going to be writing about is super contemporary. So popular sources are just going to be easier to find. I do allow that. But I recommend you at least try first to find some scholarly sources, and I say this for 2 reasons. Number one, many popular sources are kind of useless, and we did talk about this in class. I didn't see a lot of people struggle with this, but anyone who did struggled hard on paper 2. Things like, you can't use a movie review. The argument with that is like, it's good or not. Fuck, we're not, come on. No movie reviews. Some people use like an IMDb page. It's got like trivia on it. Why would that? So popular sources can be dicey, especially if you're not really sure about what we're trying to do in a paper. So you have to be careful. But a lot of you found some good ones. Several of you used one from a website like Reverse Gear. I saw that was a really good one that some people pulled for Die Hard, stuff like that. Okay. All that said, very briefly, I want to show you a couple things here with scholarly sources. I'll try to make it a wee bit larger. All right. So years ago, I had a really good paper on the movie Shrek. I may have mentioned this in the video before. Now, of course, when you first pull it up, you're going to get all kinds of crap. You got to do a couple things first. You got to go full text. And you got to do peer review. And that's going to trim a lot. All right. So there's always going to be weird stuff. Apparently some jerk named a family of proteins Shrek, which doesn't help anyone in the future because they're going to have noise like that in their results. This is happier than ever to be exactly what he was. Reflections on Shrek, Fiona, and the magic mirrors of commodity culture. That idea of commodity culture, the accrual of things, just stuff. Kind of like Tom. Apparently they think that's reflected in the movie somehow. They're going to talk about that. That's crazy and interesting. Shrek and ideology, we're talking about Beauty and the Beast. Okay. That one's weird, but all right. I guess it was really popular stuff in other languages. Hollywood's vision of, now we're talking about minority figures, even though Shrek is not Spanish. I guess Donkey is? No, the cat. The cat's Spanish. Yeah, all right, it's been a minute. Gender, we're talking, absolutely, we're talking about gender in Shrek. All right, one other thing I want to show you. If that didn't work, right, with your movie, and you may not find things specifically about your movie, you could also just do one of these, right? You always do that. And you just see, you know? That was kind of weird. I don't know how useful that would be. There's that Shrek and ideology once. That's pretty interesting. That was kind of weird. There's that one about sexuality. This is interesting. Gender themes in diary cartoon novels. That might be kind of cool. Fairy tale magic in the, all right, that's weird. But you get the idea. Like, you can actually find legit scholarly stuff that thinks about themes reflected in these movies. And I know it sounds odd, but I'll put it to you this way. Shrek was huge. Probably for you guys. It came out in like 2004-ish. I know we don't know off the top of our heads, but something like that. I feel like it came out when I was in high school. So I was not the target market. I did not see it until a couple years ago because I had small children. When did it come out?
2001.
2001. I was in high school. Yeah. I wasn't going to see Shrek. But you guys probably did. And everyone your age did too. When something is that big, usually it both imparts something upon our culture and, of course, as I've said to you before, reflects something about our culture too. People are going to write about that. People are going to think about that. Shrek and masculinity would be something to look up. Shrek and fairy tales, knights, heroes, Shrek and femininity, because obviously the Fiona character. I'm saying all this like you guys are familiar with the film. Are you guys at least somewhat familiar with the film? Okay. I've seen it a lot now. A lot. The first two are actually really great. I've thought about teaching them before. The third one is shit. That happens. But anyway, you can dig into anything. You can investigate anything because, again, they were made by our culture. They were made by people who are just like us from, in some ways, a similar background to us. Okay? So it reflects something about us. All of it does. Any questions about anything I just kind of put on you there? Okay. I am hyper curious since you brought it up. I just want to see something real quick. I keep promising you a break. We will take a break right after this. Just want to see. Because that one's really recent. But you can. A case study of swear words that could be interesting. When our anti-heroes do less and we reward them more, okay? So, I don't know if that's useful, that's weird. That's the same thing. Disability and white masculinization in science fiction film? That sounds wild. Okay. I forgot too, yeah, I guess he's technically like a disabled guy because he's like all burned up and stuff, like you can't go grocery shopping, right? Like y'all can with that. Yeah.
Right. But if I'm talking about satire, how in the heck would I add something like that in?
Well, you may or may not be. Like, I mean, all I want to do today is like raise questions and you guys go look up stuff. I mean, you don't have to decide on an argument today, okay? And I mean, frankly, I don't know about this. Let's see if it has an abstract. All right, yeah, he's contaminated, mutated, social anxieties. He's seen as a kind of a monster. Compares The Thing, which is an excellent film, to Deadpool, which is a wild connection. Human futurity, monstrous disability, the need to be redeemed. Does Deadpool probably need to be redeemed in some way, I imagine? White, able-bodied masculinization, human quality. Basically, the question here is like, how do we define what's human, and perhaps more importantly, how do we disallow people from being seen as human? Do we do that perhaps to the disabled on occasion? Maybe. Not intentionally. I mean, there's some fuckers out there, but like most of us, we're not saying you're not a person, but you may view people differently, right? I think this particular paper is and I know you guys can't read that, but I've sped through it, is somehow asking that question, like given how Deadpool is depicted, why do we cheer for him when we cheer for him? Why does he need to be redeemed in the film? Why does he think so? What might that say about us? Questions like that. That may or may not have anything to do with the paper you end up writing, right? But the point I'm making to you is, when you look these movies up, first of all, sometimes you can find really cool stuff on your actual text. That happens. Other times you may not, but you may find something else that ties into it in some way, especially if you tie it to a theme like I did with this. You just gotta see what's out there. All right, take a break. We'll come back.